My name's Katie Bucher. I'm the marketing specialist here at Providence Little Company of Mary Medical Center, Torrance. And on behalf of marketing, I just want to welcome you to this evening's presentation. I'm going to go ahead and introduce our moderator for this evening, Nikki Robles. Nikki is a registered dietitian and clinical nutrition manager for Providence Little Company Mary, Torrance, and San Pedro. She has 36 years of clinical nutrition management experience, both at Providence Little Company Mary, Torrance, and San Pedro Medical Centers. Nikki oversees the outpatient nutrition counseling for both Torrance and San Pedro. Outside of work, Nikki loves to grow vegetables in her garden, travel, and spend time with her grandson, Will. So please join me in welcoming Nikki.
Thank you, Katie. Does anybody have any idea what today is? It's World Diabetes Day. So it's kind of fitting that we're here today together. And it is my pleasure to introduce Christina Cook, registered dietitian here at Providence, a Little Company of Mary. She works both inpatient with our inpatients and also does outpatient nutrition counseling. She graduated with her Bachelor of Science degree in nutrition from Cal Poly San Luis Obispo and completed her dietetic internship at Keene State in Keene, New Hampshire. She's been a dietitian for 1 year and will soon be applying for her Master of Science in Nutrition and is working towards her Certified Diabetes Educator certification. In her free time, Christina likes to cook, bake, and spend time in nature. And I know she does a lot of hiking. Please welcome Christina.
Hi, you guys. Thank you so much for having me, and thank you so much for coming out. I'm going to get us started on the nutrition portion. Okay. Can you hear me okay?
Yes.
Okay, so we're going to start off with a little icebreaker first. I'm going to read off a few statements, and if you think it's true, I'm going to have you raise your hand, and if you think it's false, I'll have you raise your hand as well. Okay, the first statement is 50% of the United States lives with high blood sugars. Who thinks this is true? Okay. Anybody think this is false? Few people? Okay, this is actually true. So 50% of the United States is either diabetic or pre-diabetic. Okay, number 2. Diabetics are not allowed to have any potato, rice, or bananas. Who thinks this is true? Few people? Don't be shy. Okay. Who thinks this is false? A lot of people think it's false. Okay, well, it's actually false. So unless you have kidney disease, all carbohydrates are fine. Of course, there's certain ones you want to limit, which we'll go over today. If you're not sure, you can discuss it with your doctor or registered dietitian. Okay, and by the end of my presentation today, you guys will be able to identify the nutrient that turns into sugar in the body, name the food groups that contain carbohydrates, or as we'll call them, carbs, and explain 3 dietary changes that you can utilize to control your blood sugars today. Okay, so these groups here are all the different macronutrients, so proteins, fats, and carbohydrates. Our body requires all of them. So there's a lot of different diets going on right now. Can you name any popular diets? Just shout them out. Keto, paleo, Atkins is another old school one. Okay, exactly. So all of those different diets are cutting out different nutrients, but our body requires all of them. So we're going to go over ways that we can make sure we're getting all the nutrients our body requires. Okay, so first off, the energy-producing nutrients. A calorie is just a unit of energy. So carbohydrates, protein, and fat are the nutrients that provide calories to the body. Carbohydrates are the body's preferred form of energy. The brain alone requires at least 125 grams of carbohydrate, and that's just for thinking. That's not even brushing your teeth in the morning. That's not riding your bicycle or walking to your car. So we need them, but we need them in the correct portions. Carbohydrates are 4 calories per gram. And carbohydrates are the nutrient that turn into glucose, or otherwise known as sugar in the body. And that's what provides all of our tissues with energy to stay alive. So carbs break down into sugar, and then the pancreas releases insulin that allows us to bring that energy into the cells. Protein is important for building and repairing body tissue. So our blood, our bones, our skin, our muscles, all of those different organs require protein. And much like carbohydrates, proteins are also 4 calories per gram. And then fat is the last macronutrient. So fat's important for insulation. In the winter it gets cold, so we need the insulation. It also protects our internal organs, and it's reserve energy. So if we're not meeting our caloric needs through the diet, then the body will use the fat stores to make sure that we are getting that energy. So unlike carbs and protein, fat is actually 9 calories per gram. So a little high calorically, a little bit higher, but we still need it. These are the non-energy producing or non-caloric nutrients, so we still need them. Vitamins is the first one. So vitamins are important for breaking down food into energy, otherwise known as metabolism. Minerals are important for our body's skeletal structure, like bones. And water is essential for life. So for all of these different nutrients to work, we really need to make sure we're well hydrated. For every calorie we consume, we need 1 milliliter of water. So aim for about 2 liters per day. And then fiber is one you hear about a lot. So fiber is great because it keeps us regular, and it also keeps us nice and full. So it's really good for digestion. And you want to aim for at least 25 grams of fiber per day. Okay, so for optimal carbohydrate consumption, like I said, carbohydrates are the body's preferred form of energy, so we do need them, but we need them in the right portions. If we consume too many carbohydrates, the blood becomes a little bit too thick. So I like to kind of compare it like maple syrup versus water. So the blood's job is to deliver oxygen to all of the tissues to keep them alive. And if the blood is too thick like maple syrup, it can't really do that. So we want to manage our carbohydrate portions. So the best sources of carbohydrates in the diet are fruits, starchy vegetables, grains, and then dairy. To choose the best source of carbs, we want to make sure we're getting high amounts of fiber and low amounts of added sugars. Okay, now we're going to dive a little bit deeper into each one of these different carb groups. So starch. In this starch group, we're including whole grains and starchy vegetables. So the only types of starchy vegetables are beans and lentils. You guys know another one? Can anyone yell one out? Starchy vegetable? Exactly, potato, sweet potato, corn, and green peas. All other ones are non-starchy, so we'll talk about that later. So per day, to make sure you're getting all the nutrients your body needs, you need to eat about 6 to 10 servings of starch. The major nutrients you're getting from the starch group are carbohydrates and fiber. 1 serving looks like a slice of bread, 1 cup of dry cereal, unsweetened, and 1/3 cup of pasta or rice cooked. That'll give you about 15 grams of carb or 80 calories. And a tip to choose the best sorts of starches are to choose mostly whole grains. If you can aim to at least make half of your grains whole each day, then you're getting on track. So again, we want to get at least 25 grams of fiber on the lower end. Another type of carbohydrate are fruits and the fruit juices. Per day, our body requires at least 2 to 4 servings. The major nutrients are carbohydrate and fiber. 1 serving looks like 1 small or medium piece of fruit, or about 1 cup. And that'll give you about 15 grams of carb or 60 calories. So some tips here are you want to eat a variety of fruit. So like Skittles says, taste the rainbow. Each different type of color offers different antioxidants, different nutrient profiles. But you want to go easy on the juices because they spike your blood sugar really high without that fiber that the whole fruit will offer you. So I always recommend limiting the juice intake or doing sugar-free whenever possible. And if you can, just eliminating it altogether. And we'll go over some alternatives for that as well. Okay, another type of carbohydrate is the milk and dairy group. So per day, you want to get about 2 to 3 cups. And the milk and dairy group is going to provide you some carbohydrate, but also protein. 1 serving looks like 1 cup or 8 ounces of milk or yogurt, unsweetened again. And that offers about 12 grams of carb or 100 calories. So tips for choosing the best types of milk and dairy are to choose low fat or fat-free. And by doing that, we're taking out some of that saturated fat. Saturated fat is not the best for heart health, so we want to eliminate that and go low fat as much as possible. And if you don't consume milk, look for other calcium sources in the diet. So leafy greens would be an example. Now sugar, everyone knows this one. Every diabetic knows this is the carbohydrate group that we really want to limit as much as possible. Some foods naturally have sugars in them. So milk has lactose and fruits have fructose. So there are some naturally occurring ones, but those aren't really the ones we're talking about. We're talking about the ones that are added to foods. So cakes, candies, cookies, things like that. According to the American Heart Association, we want to limit it to about 6 teaspoons per day for women and about 9 for men. That comes to about 25 grams for women and 37.5 grams for men. So we want to look to the main places where manufacturers are adding some of these sugars. So one of the main places in the American diet are the sugar-sweetened beverages. So like I was talking about earlier, the juices, Gatorade, soda is a big one. So you want to choose alternatives that are just as close, satisfying as those things can be for you. So water is the obvious choice, but maybe put a few pieces of pineapple or strawberry in there just to bring out some flavor. Unsweetened tea is another great option. And flavored seltzers are one of my personal favorites. So you can, LaCroix is a brand that's really great. There's a bunch of different flavors out there without the added sugar. And then you want to limit the added sugars, not only that the manufacturers are adding, but that you're adding. So we all know that we want to limit the white table sugar like that, but we also want to limit honey, maple syrup, and agave. Because even though these are natural sugars, in the body they react in the exact same way as this type of white table sugar does. So it's still 4 calories per gram, and it's still going to kind of spike the blood sugars like that. So a few other tips are to choose low sugar or sugar-free desserts, and also unsweetened cereals and unsweetened yogurts. If you need to, you can use non-nutritive sweeteners like Splenda, or my personal preference, which is stevia. So you can play around with those and see if there's one that you like. Now proteins, these do not usually have carbohydrates in them. Servings per day, you want to get about 6 to 8 ounces or 50 to 80 grams of protein. The major nutrient that you're getting is protein, and one serving looks like 1 ounce of meat, 1 egg, 1 tablespoon of peanut butter, 1/4 of a cup of cooked beans, or 1/2 ounce of nuts or seeds. So some tips here are to choose the low fat and leaner cuts of meats. So you want to choose, not like those nice marbly steaks like we see here with all the fat in there, or the nice fatty cuts of pork. We want to do more like lean poultry. If you can remove the skin, that's a bonus. Fish is great. Pork loin can be a lean meat. And if you do want to do beef, sometimes you can do 90% or lean or ground beef. And then maybe make Monday your meatless Monday night and choose some plant-based proteins, which is really great for heart health. So something like the beans or nuts is a great option, or even tofu or tempeh. And you want to vary your different types of proteins. So by doing that, you're also going to get different nutrient profiles, like I was mentioning earlier. And this is a great tip here. So protein actually slows the breakdown of carbohydrates. So instead of having our blood sugar spike real high like this, when we add protein, it kind of helps to make it a bit more even keeled. So it rises a little more slow and goes down a little more slowly. So less spikes. So we want to include protein in all meals and snacks. Now fats are another group. So per day, we want to limit it to about 3 to 11 teaspoons, or about 60 grams, and the major nutrient is fat. Watch for it in foods like nuts, olives, mayonnaise, and salad dressing. So my biggest tip when I explain which sorts of fats we want to choose in the diet is to choose plant-based fats instead of the animal-based fats. So plant-based fats are the unsaturated fats, whereas the animal-based fats are saturated fats. And those are the ones that we want to avoid for our heart health. The only exception here are tropical oils. So this is a big discussion in the nutrition community now too. We hear a lot about coconut and palm oil. And in the body, those react more like saturated fat, more like animal fat. So we want to limit those a bit too. So instead of choosing the plant-based fats like butter, lard, those high-fat steaks, and whole-fat milk, dairy, sour cream, and cheese, it's better to choose olive oil, canola oil, avocado, nuts, seeds, peanut butter, things like that. What we do know is that trans fats we want to avoid altogether as much as possible. Those are the worst ones on the heart. Fortunately, most manufacturers are completely taking those out of foods. But a little tip is that food manufacturers are not required to list on the nutrition label that the food contains trans fat if it's less than 0.5 grams per serving. So if you're not sure, you can always check the label for hydrogenated or partially hydrogenated oils, because that's a fancy term for trans fat. So for example, Skippy peanut butter, the one with the blue lid, that has trans fat in it, and you'll see that if you read the ingredients list. So do Skippy Naturals. Now sodium. So sodium contributes to high blood pressure and heart disease. That's what we do know. We want to limit our sodium intake to about 2,000 milligrams per day. So first and foremost, we want to limit the salt when we're cooking, not adding so much salt, and also at the table. So maybe instead of the salt shaker, keep the pepper shaker. You can even do a little Mrs. Dash in one of them if you want, or some red pepper flakes. And then you also want to limit the foods that are naturally high in sodium. So cheese is one of them. Cured meats are another. So any sort of meat that's already pre-prepared, like hot dogs or sausage, bacon, ham, and even something that seems as healthy as sliced deli meat, like sliced turkey, that's going to be high in sodium as well. Because not only does sodium add flavor, but it also acts as a preservative. That's also what we see in the canned foods. So canned soups, vegetables, beans, corn. Fortunately now, you can buy low sodium or very low sodium in a can. And if you do have some full sodium canned vegetables or beans at home, you can just rinse them off underwater just to get a little bit extra off. Another place we see high sodium is in the fermented foods. So things like kimchi and sauerkraut, even pickles, those are going to be really high in sodium. And then processed foods. So everything you see in the freezer aisle, like the lean cuisine or any of those TV dinners, those are going to be loaded with sodium. Another place is anytime we go out to eat at a restaurant. I don't know if you guys watch Food Network, but sometimes you can see the chef go in with the hand and they just kind of sprinkle the salt everywhere. So chefs are notorious for adding a lot of salt to food. So anytime you go out to eat, you can bet that there's a high amount of sodium in there. So try to choose foods as close as possible to their most natural form. And what I always tell my patients is you need to layer the flavor. So, I mean, sometimes people tell me, well, it's so bland, you know, if you're just using herbs and spices. So you want to choose strong flavored herbs. So things like curry powder or cumin and cayenne, and then add the herbs in. So cilantro, that has a lot of flavor as well. Add another layer with the acid. So something like citrus juice, like lemon juice, orange juice, even vinegar is a good choice. And then you want to add a little heat too. So something like red pepper flakes or fresh jalapeno or serrano pepper, that adds another layer of flavor. And all of those things together, you don't even miss the salt. Okay, so if you do drink alcohol, you want to do so in moderation. So per day, women shouldn't exceed 1 drink. And for men, the maximum is 2 drinks per day. So 1 drink would be 12 ounces of beer, 5 ounces of wine, or 1.5 ounces of liquor. So like vodka, gin, whiskey. Blood sugars can also decrease when you're drinking because alcohol blocks glucose production in the liver. So just something to be aware of. Have snacks nearby. This is another great method. So this is a really nice, simple way to control your carbohydrate portions and really optimize your vegetable intake. So we call this the plate method. So first and foremost, you know, plates are so big these days. So start by having a smaller salad plate. And then it's more appealing to the eye as well because you can really load it up. So the first thing you want to do is you want to make half the plate coming from those non-starchy vegetables. So again, this does not include potato or sweet potato, beans and lentils, or corn or green peas. These are the non-starchy ones. So carrots, cauliflower, asparagus, whatever you like, taste the rainbow. And then in the bottom 1/4 of the plate, that's where we're gonna add the starch. So you can do corn, potatoes, and your whole grains are gonna go there. Then in the other 1/4 of the plate, you wanna pick your lean proteins. So again, that's gonna be lean poultry or fish. Maybe you're doing the Meatless Monday or something and you wanna try playing with tofu or tempeh. So that is the plate method. Now, this is an important topic to touch on as well. So, do you guys read labels here? Show of hands. Yeah, a little bit? Okay, great. So we're just going to do a little review on what you want to look for to control your blood sugar. So what's the first thing that you want to look at when you look at the label? What's the first thing you guys look at? You can just shout it out. Sugar, carbs, calories. Okay. Okay, great. So the first place you want to look, we'll use this 000 Oikos, which is one of my favorites, by the way, great for diabetics as a snack. First, you want to look at the serving size. So we're going to go over to the serving size. You can see that one container is the serving, so that makes it nice and easy for us. Then the second place that you want to look is at the total carbohydrate. Because remember, all carbohydrate turns into sugar in the body. So if we just go down to the sugar, we're missing some grams that are actually going to raise our blood sugar. And just in case you guys were wondering, one portion of carbohydrate is 15 grams. So that's perfect, right? And then these little subsections are included in the total carbohydrate. So of these 15 grams, 7 are coming from sugars and 6 are coming from fiber. Does that make sense? Okay. Okay, so meal patterns and blood sugar management really go hand in hand as well. So one of the most important things for a diabetic is that we don't want to skip meals. We want to make sure we're having 3 meals and 2 to 3 snacks per day, equally spaced about 4 to 5 hours apart. So what we're doing is if we want to keep our blood sugars within a certain range, we're just raising it perfectly and keeping it right in that zone all day. So we call it the consistent carbohydrate diet. So for men, per meal, we do about 60 to 75 grams of carbohydrate. And for women, it's about 45 to 60 grams per meal. And if you're exercising, you might need to add an extra portion because you're going to utilize that carbohydrate for energy. If you're on the shorter side, you're going to be on the lower side of carb. And if you're a little bit taller, you're going to be on the taller side or the higher side. And again, this is just carbohydrates that we're looking at here. Okay, physical activity helps blood sugars and also metabolic syndrome. So physical activity helps the blood sugars, it helps with blood pressure and cholesterol, and weight management as well. So each day we want to aim for at least 30 to 90 minutes of physical activity, moderate to vigorous intensity. And if you're doing less time, try to get a more intense workout in if possible. Activity helps with insulin sensitivity. It increases fat and sugar uptake by muscle. And it also helps with stress and blood sugar. So we want to make sure that we're doing something that we actually enjoy though. So for example, in high school, I used to love dancing. I was on the dance team. So I used to take Zumba classes where, I could do what I enjoy. So you want to pick something that's actually enjoyable for you, or else it's not going to be sustainable. It's not going to be something that you can do in the long run and see that consistent change, because consistency is important. Okay, and the weight loss equation, again, calories are units of energy. So if energy intake is greater than your output, that's going to lead to weight gain. So again, the calories coming in, we're looking at our foods, beverages, even our condiments. That's a place people often forget. So ketchup, teriyaki sauce, barbecue sauce, those are high sugar, high calorie. And then calories out. So that includes our activities of daily living, like brushing our teeth, walking the dog, and then also getting that exercise in. So you want to at least balance it. So today, I challenge you guys to pick one of the dietary modifications that you learned and incorporate it into your lifestyle today. Thank you.
Okay, and we're going to ask you to hold your questions to the very end, but please be writing them down. Next, I have the pleasure of introducing Dr. Kalof. In addition to her private practice, Dr. Kalof is an assistant professor on the faculty in the Department of Endocrinology at Charles Drew University in Los Angeles. She is active both in Endocrinology Society and American Association of Clinical Endocrinologists. She is a recipient of multiple awards, including a prestigious award from Women in Endocrinology for her research activities. Dr. Kalof is an avid speaker, teacher, and writer. She has authored many papers, chapters, and co-authored a book entitled The Long Life Equation, 100 Factors That Determine How Long You Will Live. Dr. Kalof enjoys working with diabetes and thyroid conditions. However, she maintains a strong interest in women's health issues, including osteoporosis and reproductive issues. She has been the principal investigator of a National Institute of Health funded study on the influence of testosterone on women. She employs her knowledge and skills to improve communication and empower her patients. Dr. Kalof is board certified and enjoys caring for her patients in her specialty field of endocrinology and internal medicine. She is on staff as a consulting physician both at Providence Little Company of Mary, Torrance, and San Pedro. In her spare time, you have spare time? Dr. Kalof enjoys outdoor activities with her husband and her 3 children. Welcome, Dr. Kalof.
Thank you. Welcome. I'm glad you're all here. Good to see some familiar faces, too. I'm going to talk a little bit about diabetes, the 2 kinds, type 1 and type 2. I'll tell you a little bit about what I do. Some of you who may know me will know that I like to talk, and I'm happy answering questions, and I'm happy to stay as long as necessary. If you feel you're up for it, please get up and walk around. And we always talk about prevention of diabetes, so part of prevention is exercise and not sitting for too long. So you should be getting up and walking around about every 30 minutes, so feel free to get up, stretch, no problems. I'll be up and walking around. So I do practice in San Pedro. I don't have an office here in Torrance. I do have some colleagues practicing with Providence Medical Associates. In Redondo Beach, Dr. Naki is in our department, and so is Dr. Ruby, and some of you may or may not have seen those doctors. So we'll talk a little bit about who's at risk, signs and symptoms of diabetes, screening and diagnosis, and some treatment options. And I'll show you what kind of goes on in the back of our heads when we're talking about treatment options. So as an endocrinologist, what do? Do we just treat diabetes? In fact, no. Many primary care doctors are now treating diabetes, and if you have diabetes, you're not always going to be seeing a specialist and perhaps an endocrinologist. We see kind of the high-risk cases or the more advanced cases where the primary care physicians sometimes say, I don't know what else to do, I need some help, or this person really needs control very quickly. So we treat diabetes, type 1 and 2. We treat thyroid disorders, osteoporosis, hypertension related to endocrine disorders, cholesterol or advanced lipid disorders, infertility in men and in women, especially with endocrine causes, lack of growth or growth hormone disruptions, and cancers of the endocrine glands. This is a quiz of diabetes, and we don't have handouts, but I'm going to ask you to kind of keep tabs and feel free to check off with your pens and paper, and I'll go ahead and read the questions for you. You can find this online through the American Diabetes Association, and you'll be able to take the quiz online, and it's available. This is a quiz just to kind of reaffirm the risk we all carry for diabetes in this country. And the question number 1 is, how old are you? If you're less than 40 years old, that's 0 points. If you're 40 to 49, that's 1 point. 50 to 59, that's 2 points. 60 years and older, 3 points. If you don't remember or you miss some of these questions, don't worry. Like I said, everything is online and easy to access. I will say I'm the 40 to 49 years, so that would be 1 point. Are you a man or a woman? That's easy. There might be some alternatives. Man, 1 point, woman, 0 points. So that's 0 for me. If you're a woman, have you ever been diagnosed with gestational diabetes? Yes would be 1. No would be 0. Do you have a mother, father, sister, or brother with diabetes? Yes for 1 point. No for 0 points. Have you ever been diagnosed with high blood pressure? Yes for 1 point. No for 0 points. Are you physically active? I guess it doesn't say how physically active. So are you physically active? Are you getting up and exercising? Hopefully most days of the week, about 5 days a week, about 45 to 60 minutes a day. Would you say you're physically active? If you're yes, 0 point. If you're no, that's 1 point. The other question is your weight status, and I'm not going to go through that. You may go ahead and tabulate the points you have, and if you scored 5 or higher, that's not even counting the weight, you're at increased risk for having type 2 diabetes. But your doctor should be able to discern if you truly have diabetes or you're at risk for diabetes and give you more information. So the bottom line is if you score 5 or more, it's worth coming here and learning more. It's worth talking to your doctor to discuss the risks of diabetes. In general, in this country, anyone who's above age 45 is high risk. It's incredible how prevalent it is. So thank you to our dietitian who spoke just before. I have a couple of slides on food, just because everyone who comes to my office, what's the first thing they ask? What do I eat? What do I eat? I had 1 semester in medical school to teach me about carbohydrates, fats, and proteins, and I still didn't know very much. I didn't really need to know very much, honestly. I didn't care to know. But now that I'm practicing this every day, all of a sudden I've had a crash course. Now I have to know. And actually, I do spend some time teaching my kids, too, a program about nutrition and teaching kids what carbohydrates, fats, and proteins. It's amazing. Kids don't know, and we as adults don't even know how to read labels, food labels, nutrition labels. What's a carbohydrate? What's it for? What's a fat? So after eating, most food or most carbohydrate is turned into glucose, and that's the body's main source of energy. If we consume a meal or, say, a diet that's deplete or doesn't have any carbohydrates in it, if we eat all fats and protein, we could not survive for the most part. Yes, there are ketogenic diets out there, but they still require carbohydrates. So our brains and our bodies function on carbohydrates. We need them. But you said they're bad. As a diabetic, carbohydrates are bad. Well, let's see if we can find some middle ground. Normal blood sugar control. Our body does an incredible job fixing and correcting our sugar imbalances. Anytime we eat, or if we're not diabetic, if we eat cake, cookies, Slurpees, our sugars don't spike up. What happens? Our bodies control it, and they keep it perfectly balanced throughout the day. In people without diabetes, sugars stay in the normal range. What's a normal range? We usually say 70 to 90. Blood sugar, if you ever know, 70 to 90. For those of you who checked your sugar, usually in the morning before eating, 70 to 90, 70 to 100 is a normal sugar. Under 120 is a good sugar after meals too, and in diabetics, we accept slightly different numbers. Insulin is released at the right times and in the right amounts when we consume any carbohydrates. And insulin is like a key to open up the cell and let the sugar in for each cell in our body to get the energy that it needs. In diabetes, what happens? We have lots of sugar in the blood, lots and lots of sugar, but we may or may not have enough insulin to get the sugar into cells. We may not have enough insulin, and cells can't use the insulin very well. And unfortunately, to compensate, sometimes our liver produces more sugar than it should. Just so you know, when we sleep or between meals, how does our body keep our sugar stable? Why don't we go super low in between meals or at night? Well, our body has a wonderful, what we call homeostatic mechanism, and it stores food in the form of glycogen. And when we're not eating, that glycogen, that stored carbohydrate, is used to produce energy. And most times it's stored in the liver produces or makes sugar out of glycogen, and a lot of that glycogen can be stored in muscle. That's an amazing way our bodies maintain homeostasis. When we have high sugar, hyperglycemia is high sugar. we may have some symptoms. But in a lot of my patients in clinic, there may be no symptoms. People come into our clinics and say, I don't feel anything. But sir, your sugar is 400. I feel fine. It's amazing how often we see that. But we may have some subtle signs. What are some subtle signs? We may have increased thirst, thirsty or drinking, having to drink water, or many times people drink juice. Increased urination, running to the bathroom. Hunger, that's what we call the 3 Ps, polyphagia, polydipsia, polyuria. So urinating a lot, hungry a lot, and thirsty a lot. Blurry vision, why? Because that sugar gets into our eyes, and it causes blurry vision. Many times when I have a patient who's had very high sugars, I tell them, yes, go get your eyes checked, but you may not want to get glasses just yet, because that sugar is going to improve and your vision may change. You may have to come back and get a whole new prescription glasses because your sugar is still stabilizing. They may have slow healings of cuts and wounds. They may have more frequent infections. In women, many times, we have more frequent yeast infections. That may be the first sign. Yeast infections or urinary tract infections as a first sign of diabetes. Weight loss. Boy, that's a big one. I have people coming in. We have lots of issues with weight in our clinic. And people come in many times, I've been losing weight. I feel great. But your sugar is really high. It's amazing. In diabetes, here's what happens. You have high blood sugar circulating in your blood. That sugar doesn't have the insulin. There's no insulin to open up the cell and let the sugar in. So what do we get? We get lots and lots of sugar in our blood, no sugar getting into our brain, and no sugar getting into our cells. So our brain keeps saying, I'm starving, so you get really hungry. Your body tries to get rid of that extra sugar. How do we get rid of extra sugar? Well, we urinate it out. So we have lots of urine, and we get super dehydrated. And then the body still needs energy. So how do we get energy? Well, we use the glycogen, but we only have a few hours of stored glycogen. So what's the next source? Fat and muscle. So what do? We lose weight. We have tons of sugar in the blood, none of it getting into our cells, and our body needs energy, so our body depletes. Our stores are fat and muscle. So what happens when we start treatment for diabetes? People gain weight. And oftentimes they come in kind of upset that we made them gain weight. Well, what's happening is your body is getting back to normal. It's catching up to what it's lost, and it's regaining that fat and muscle. Hopefully, it's all muscle, so we say maybe try to exercise or stay active so that whatever you regain is going to be protein. And then you're back to normal. You want to achieve that stability. And sometimes we have nausea and vomiting. So people often don't feel very good, but it's amazing how our bodies adapt. Our bodies are incredible. They adapt to some of these insanely high sugars. High sugars can definitely cause serious long-term problems. What are some chronic problems associated and complications of diabetes? All these things we scare you with. We scare you. You're going to be blind. I had a sign in my office that said, if your A1C is greater than 8, you're going to be blind. That really caught a lot of people's attention. I took that up. I have nicer signs now, but it really grabs your attention. Much of blindness in this country is due to diabetes. Most of dialysis patients are on dialysis secondary to diabetes. There's nerve damage, amputations, number one cause of amputations. Diabetes, heart attacks, number one cause of death in diabetes. Heart attack, oh my goodness. Strokes, why? My kids would always say, but why? Why? What happens to all that sugar? Is all that sugar normal in our blood? Having all that sugar in the blood vessels? Is that normal? I always say, let's see an analogy. How can we make an analogy? So we all know cars in LA, right? Most of us still drive a car here. Not too many ways of getting around without it. So what happens? We have blood and lots of sugar in our vessels. What if we say we have a car that requires premium unleaded? What if we fill it up with diesel? Does it still run? It still runs. It may still run, right? But does it run efficiently? Does it run perfectly? Will it break down pretty fast? It's going to break down pretty fast. So that diesel is not great for our blood vessels. It causes lots of problems in the vessel. So up on top, you see a healthy artery, and on the bottom, you see a partially blocked artery. Yes, it increases plaque in the arteries. Yes, it increases what we say the rigidity. It makes the vessels a lot harder. It's much harder. So we're at higher risk for developing plaque and developing problems. And it happens in every single vessel in our body. That's why we get higher risk of heart disease, higher risk of stroke, higher risk of nerve death. It's that sugar. It's like honey or syrup circulating in our blood. It gets stuck everywhere. So we may not always feel it, but it's there. And it's better to not have it. There are two main kinds of diabetes. There's type 1 and type 2. Type 1 diabetes is when the pancreas, I'll show you what the pancreas is, makes too little or no insulin. Type 2 diabetes is when cells do not use insulin well. They have something called insulin resistance. It decreases the ability of pancreas to produce insulin over time. Type 1 diabetes, I'm not going to talk about very much right now. I'm mostly going to be talking about type 2 diabetes. Type 1 diabetes, for the most part, is diagnosed in the young, and it's generally, it could be autoimmune, but again, it could be very sudden onset in young kids, and the main treatment is insulin. Type 2 diabetes is one that we can oftentimes diagnose in adults. Nowadays, unfortunately, we're diagnosing it more and more in kids and young adults. And it's something that we can always start with lifestyle and medications, possibly insulin. Once we have a diagnosis of type 2 diabetes, the pancreas may not be working effectively. It means that your pancreas is not keeping up with demand. It means that maybe we can help with lifestyle, but not always. And it's something that we always want to discuss with you. Here's what the pancreas, sorry. Looking for the little pointer, which is really tiny. Pancreas, right in the middle, and where is it? It's under our stomach, and it produces hormone. It's a hormone organ, hormone generating organ. We call it exocrine and endocrine. So it produces insulin, which helps control sugar, glucagon, which helps to increase sugar. So insulin decreases sugar in our blood. Glucagon increases sugar in our blood. What happens with people who have very, very low sugars, type 1 diabetics? Sometimes we send them home with a glucagon pen. What does a glucagon pen do? You inject it, it raises sugars very quickly. It's analogous to our normal endogenous glucagon. And that's the pancreas producing insulin. So we talked about type 1 diabetes. Type 1 diabetes is a lot less prevalent than type 2. About 1 in 20 of people with diabetes have type 1, so about 5%. Most people are under 20 when they're diagnosed, and it means that your body, for the most part, can no longer make insulin. And insulin is almost always needed for treatment. Very rarely in type 1 diabetes. There are other kinds called MODI, that's a whole other game, where we can use medications. Symptoms, like I said, usually start pretty suddenly in type 1 diabetics. They have weight loss, loss of energy, increased thirst, again, frequent urination, diabetic ketoacidosis. If you think about in diabetes, something called ketoacidosis occurs. It can occur in both type 1 and sometimes even type 2. Why is this significant? In diabetes, we keep talking about the long-term effects. Long-term effects take somewhere between 10 to 20 years to occur if it's uncontrolled. So long-term effect, we'd mentioned blindness, kidney disease, neuropathy or amputation, some of these long-term problems, heart disease. There are what we call acute problems, rapid onset problems from diabetes, and that can stem from very high sugars and very low sugars. And in very high sugars in type 1 diabetics, you get something called diabetic ketoacidosis. Why does that happen? Because there's lots of sugar in the blood, and the body is trying to use up its fat and protein stores for energy. But if it uses up too much of that fat, it develops what we call acidosis. It produces an acid state in the body, and that is dangerous and life-threatening. So sometimes with very high sugars, type 1 diabetics end up in something called diabetic ketoacidosis. They're in the ICU. It is life-threatening. It carries a very high morbidity and mortality. So something we definitely want to try and avoid. Managing type 1 diabetes, as I mentioned, a lot of it is insulin, most of it, lots of education. We do not work alone. As an endocrinologist, I'm going to tell you, we have to work as a team. I can give you the basics of diet, but I got to send you to the experts, the dietitians and the diabetic educators. I'm not always able and available to teach you as much as you need to know about diet. It's a college, honestly, it's like a college level course. And I'm glad you're all here. You're curious, you want to know a lot more, and I say knowledge is power, but the information you get here over an hour and a half is not even close to how much you need to know as a diabetic. The more we know, the better off we are. Physical activity is very healthy for anyone, type 1 and type 2 diabetes, and insulin. I don't want anybody telling me ever, I don't want to start insulin. Insulin is a godsend. Thank God we have insulin. 1921, Banting and Best discovered insulin, and they used dogs. 1921 changed type 1 diabetes treatment. How was type 1 diabetes treatment in the past? How was it treated? Riding a horse, fasting, not having any food at all. They would be treated with a diet of fat and protein, and I believe it was like 600 calories, some atrocious diet. They had no carbohydrates at all. There was no treatment prior to 1921. We are so lucky we have insulin. Thank God we have that. And this is a picture of a 7-year-old girl before and after 3 months of insulin therapy. It's amazing. And kids that did not survive with type 1 diabetes. Here's another picture. You can see the emaciated form of this young girl. And what did she say? Dear Dr. Banting, I'm a little girl in Texas who's taking Iletin. That was the first name of insulin at the time. It is making me feel better, and I'm so happy. I want to thank you. Merry Christmas. Type 2 diabetes. Most people with diabetes, as we mentioned, have type 2. That test that we took in the beginning with 5 points or more, that was a test for type 2, not for type 1. Type 2. Type 2, for the most part, is, as I mentioned, diagnosed in people over age 40. But it's becoming more common in young adults, children, and teens, sadly. I'm out there at my kids' school teaching them about the healthy foods. It's shocking to see what kids are bringing to school these days. It's really sad and scary. We teach them to try and have healthy snacks. We'll bring things over and have them try it, and it's amazing for them. It's very gratifying to see kids try something new that's healthy for them. Type 2 is more likely in people who are overweight, non-Caucasian, and have a family history of type 2 diabetes. They're usually subtle, and there are no symptoms, but we mentioned some early stages of high blood sugar can cause higher increased thirst, urination, feeling tired. Everyone in my clinic is tired. So what do? If my patients come in and they say, I'm exhausted, I say, check your sugar, check your thyroid, let's check your blood counts, sure. Those are the two things we always ask. Blurred vision and more frequent infections are common as early signs in type 2 diabetes, but they could be mistaken for other problems. 1 in 4 diabetics don't know they have it. So we're not doing a good enough job diagnosing diabetes. And that's what makes you stand out. You're all here wanting to know, and you're all here getting checked. It's incredible. It's so wonderful to see you. Treatment for type 2 diabetes may change over a lifetime. You have to understand that sometimes, even a diagnosis, you're doing well, it may get worse over time. And it always includes, as a first step, education. Education with our dietitians and education with our diabetic educators. Healthy eating. We have to stop and take a step back and say, what can I change in my life that will make me healthier, that will decrease the risk of diabetes, or if I have diabetes, that will decrease the risk of progression. Blood sugar monitoring can be a part of type 2 diabetes. Exercise. It may include medications and may include insulin, but that's a decision you and I will make, you and your doctor will make. You don't always need treatment in type 2, medication treatment in type 2 diabetes. The risk factors, as we mentioned, I'm going to stress those over and over. Being overweight. In my office, there's a sign called, "What's your number?" Do you know what that implies? To me, in my office, it means two things. It's actually three things. It means the A1C. If you're a diabetic, you better know what your A1C is, and we'll talk about that in a moment. It means your blood pressure. You should know what your blood pressure is. And normal is 120/70. We will accept slightly higher blood pressures, but let's talk about it. And what's the third one? Your body mass index. You know what that is? BMI. We're all checking everybody for BMI these days. What's normal? I know doctors are all about numbers. Normal BMI, under 25. If you're under 25, you're good. In my office, most people are not, but that's okay. We get the high risk, like I said. Normal is under 25. For Asian Americans, the new standards came out from American Diabetes Association. Normal BMI is under 23. Because Asian Americans tend to carry less weight. So if you're over 23 as an Asian American, you're considered slightly overweight. Age is a big factor, and ethnic racial background. Why is that important? I'll go over that in a moment. African American, Hispanic, Latino, Native American, Asian Americans are at higher risk for diabetes, even at slimmer weights. Here's my picture, the Neanderthals, caveman. I always talk about caveman in my office. Well, not always, but I do. I like to bring that up. Why? We are caveman. Have we changed? We've evolved, right? But we're still caveman on the inside. We still have the same hearts, the same livers, the same brain, well, more or less the same brains. Maybe the brains evolved a little bit, but we are caveman on the inside. Did caveman pick up fast food? Did caveman have Cokes? Right? Did caveman have a microwave? What did they do? They hunted, they gathered, they fasted. They had to go out and work for their food, right? Do you think they were obese? They wouldn't have stood a chance trying to escape from dinosaurs, right? Or someone, if they were overweight. So we are still them. Our bodies, our pancreas, our hearts, our livers are there. They're not designed to come home and sit on the couch and catch up on some television and watch some commercials or fun, right? So this is what we're designed to do. So all the times we tell you, you gotta eat healthy, you gotta eat your vegetables, you gotta exercise. Why? Because that's us. So what's happened in the US, I have another talk, and I can talk about it another time. I'm from the former Soviet Union. I'm from Ukraine. So I come from a time where we didn't have a lot of food. And we didn't have a lot of energy and electricity and water and all that stuff. So I've been to a third world country, and here I am in the US with microwaves and fast food and easy, drive-through diners. So there's been a big change, and we've seen that in the US. And we may not have been at risk for diabetes there, but I'm at huge risk for diabetes here. And in fact, my mom did develop diabetes, and she had every single complication. How ironic, right? Because I'm the endocrinologist. No one listens to their kids. So these are pictures of diabetes over time, 1990, 1995, and the bottom one is 2000. The more colorful it is, the more red you see, the increased diabetes we have in the country. And this correlates with obesity. We are becoming, in the country, more obese and much more prevalent with diabetes. This is a huge epidemic. Diabetes in the US, nearly, well, what do numbers mean? There's a lot of us. 26 million people in the US have diabetes. 7 million people, we said 1 in 4, are undiagnosed. Right now, it's about 8% of the population, but it's about to get 30% of the population. It's a huge amount. It's 26.9 of US residents age 65 and older are diabetic. Every 17 seconds, someone is diagnosed with diabetes. It's the leading cause, as I mentioned, of blindness, kidney failure, amputations. It's an increased risk of stroke by 2 to 4 times. It's the 7th leading cause of death, but only because that's diabetes. But if it's a heart attack, most likely it's due to diabetes. Is it a stroke? Most likely it's due to diabetes. Is it many causes of death, unfortunately, are diabetes related. And then mortality rates are 2 to 4 times greater than non-diabetic people at the same age. It's incredibly expensive, not just personally, privately, but to the people, the population. Total diabetes-related costs are more when you add gestational diabetes, that's diabetes in pregnancy, prediabetes, and undiagnosed diabetes. 1 in 5 healthcare dollars is spent caring for someone with diabetes. 1 in 10 healthcare dollars is attributed directly to diabetes. And I always say, diet, exercise is cheap. If you start looking at the medications that are used for diabetes, they are expensive. And yes, a good chunk of my visit with patients is discussing the cost of medications. Some of the newer, fancier medications are not cheap. If you want to know, there is no generic insulin. There might be some vials, and it's rare to find that, but insulin could be in the hundreds of $1,000s per month. If you have good insurance, great, but guess what we're dealing with right now? The donut hole. If you know what the donut hole is, it's not pretty. It is expensive, and we've got to give away a ton of samples because people are in this crazy donut hole where Medicare stops paying or stops supporting a lot of medication costs. Hopefully you will never find out what the donut hole is. A quick quiz. Where is your pancreas located? You saw a picture. Is it on top of the kidneys, behind the stomach, inside the thyroid gland? I didn't tell you where the thyroid gland is. I guess that would be in the neck, or in the basement. That pancreas is super important. Hopefully you never have to worry about your pancreas. So it's behind the stomach from the picture you saw. So what is prediabetes? 1 in 3 Americans have prediabetes. It occurs before, kind of an introduction to the high sugars, before we have type 2 diabetes. Blood sugar are higher than normal, but not yet diabetes. We used to call this a touch of diabetes, slightly high sugar, right? We didn't have a name for it up until a few years ago. And most people with prediabetes don't even know they have it. Is it important to know you have prediabetes? It is. Why? Because the next step is diabetes. These days, pre-diabetics have a much higher rate of heart disease. Why do we have a much higher rate of heart disease? Because of that darn sugar. Remember we said diesel versus premium unleaded? I want my premium unleaded. I don't want diesel. But it's sitting there in your blood vessels, and it's damaging them over time. As I may have mentioned, once type 2 diabetes is diagnosed, our pancreas is not producing enough insulin. But we can still catch up to it. We can still prevent it here. But what we do want to address as well in prediabetes, and we're very aggressive about it in diabetes, is prevention of heart disease. So we may talk about statin use or cholesterol-lowering ways with you if you're diagnosed with prediabetes. Okay, I've scared you enough, right? Is there any good news? Yes, we can reduce the chances of developing type 2 diabetes. We talked about it, being a caveman. Weight loss, exercise, medications. We can control blood sugar through diet, monitoring, medication. We can control our blood pressure, cholesterol, having regular visits to the healthcare providers. You're not just visiting us for us to yell at you. I promise, I don't yell. We're your partners. We're there to help. We're there to prevent disease, not to make things worse. Early detection and treatment of complications is crucial. Most diabetes costs are due to end-stage complications. Dialysis, incredibly expensive. Heart disease, heart medications, procedures, surgeries, those cardiac caths, those scans, they're incredibly expensive. What is cheap? Diet, exercise. It's cheap. I even tell people, Weight Watchers can take the place of most of your medications. It's like $50 a month, and I think we have a discount if we refer you. It's priceless. It's incredible. Saves you so much money, not having to worry about the donut hole. It also pays off in a longer life, increased productivity, reduced costs, but also just quality of life. If someone has diabetes, we often aim for numbers. And you can talk about those numbers. These are published anywhere. What's an A1C? And I'll talk about that in a minute. A1C in diabetics, we recommend under 7. If you're younger and healthier, we want it under 6.5 or even 6. And if you're a woman who wants to get pregnant, we need it under 6. Get your blood pressure under control. As I mentioned, 120 over 70 is normal, but we accept under 140 over 80. If your cholesterol even a little bit high, and I'd say LDL greater than 70, you may need to be on a statin. And yes, I will give you every single reason to be on a statin and 0 reasons not to be on a statin, but I'm happy to discuss it. Get help to quit smoking, be active, make healthy food choices, and we had some good information just now. Take care of those feet because they are at risk. Why are the feet at risk in diabetes? I mentioned that the nerves get damaged, that the sugar. Why are the feet important? They're the furthest away from our heart, and they have the smallest vessels. So the first thing that gets damaged are those tiniest, smallest vessels. So where are they? They're in our feet, in our kidneys, in our eyes. Those are the first signs we see of diabetes. So what do we check oftentimes? We definitely check your feet in the office. We ask you, get your eye exam every year. And we check your kidneys. We check your urine. And we do something called the microalbumin-creatinine ratio. That's the earliest sign of kidney damage we can see in diabetes. And get those recommended treatments. American Diabetes Association has wonderful information, 1-800-DIABETES or diabetes.org, Stop Diabetes. You may see lots of these. Very easy, just type in American Diabetes Association on Google and you've got it. How does a person get diabetes? Did they catch it from a friend or family? Is there a virus that transmits it? By eating too much candy, white rice, or flour? People say, if you eat all that candy, Halloween, right? You're going to get diabetes. Or not known. What do you think? You're good. You're good, guys. This is just a slide about diabetes when the person's blood sugar levels are higher than normal but not high enough. This is becoming important, and if you want to know numbers, we may have mentioned that. 5.7 to 6.4 A1C is prediabetes. And I want to tell you what the A1C is. It's a blood test with a memory. Why do we keep talking about this acronym, hemoglobin A1C, hemoglobin A1C? Why? Well, it starts with hemoglobin. Where is hemoglobin found? In the blood, right? We got hemoglobin in our blood. Excellent. So why this particular hemoglobin A1C? Well, it turns out Hemoglobin has a lifespan of about 3 months in your blood in normal circumstances, unless you're bleeding or you have some other disorder of your blood vessels, and sugar gets stuck to hemoglobin. So hemoglobin attracts and sticks to sugar. So when we do a blood test, of this something called specific hemoglobin, A1C, and we check how much sugar is stuck to that hemoglobin. And that gives us a very nice correlation of your average sugar over the last 3 months. So that's why we check it about every 3 months or more or less, sometimes less. That correlates very nicely with the average sugar. Does it give me all the high sugars? No. Does it give me all the low sugars? No. Does it give me the high sugar if you just ate that morning? No. It gives me the average. That's what we use to monitor. It's not the only useful thing we have in diabetes, but it's a great, great tool to monitor. As long as you see well and urinate, diabetes is not affecting your organs. That's what's sad and scary. It's a hidden danger. We don't feel it. We talked about it. Some people feel nothing. Like I said, I have my patients 400, 500, or high, what's called high blood sugar in our machine, high, and they feel fine. So what do? We give them lots and lots of water. Sometimes we give them insulin, and their sugars come down to at least detectable range. So you're absolutely right. These are numbers. You don't have to know the numbers, but if someone is diabetic, it is helpful to know your number. In normal sugars, normal individuals, normal sugar is under 100, and the A1C, that hemoglobin A1C, is under 5.7. Prediabetes is 5.7 to 6.4, if you want to be precise. Diabetes is diagnosed with an A1C greater than 6.5. There are other ways to diagnose diabetes, but if we use the A1C, this is the number we look for. So what is the treatment of type 2 diabetes? It is the combination of nutrition, activity, and medication. Can we do it with just medication? We're going to pile you we're going to put you on a ton of medications. It's going to be a lot of medication. It may still not be enough. We need your help. We need your help with the nutrition and activity so we can use the least amount of medication that's necessary. We are bombarded with commercials and advertising. That's maybe 2 examples of a million of them. We get conflicting messages. Western bacon thick burger with crispy curls, oh boy, from Hardee's. And then lose weight on a large scale, right? Have a hamburger and then come to our clinic to lose weight. The foods you eat are your body's energy source. This is just a little recap of what you learned in our last hour. You need energy to maintain your body's temperature, keep your heart beating, and enable you to understand what's going on. When your body uses nutrients in foods, a series of chemical reactions occurs, and as a result, energy is released. We all talk about metabolism. What is metabolism? Here's the definition. It's the chemical process by which your body breaks down food to release as energy. Based on what we just learned, which lunch would you eat? Here's 2 slices of pizza. Total of 750 calories. Each slice is 375 calories. Pizza, the 2 slices of pizza versus a slice of pizza, maybe a salad and an apple and maybe an orange. This is also 750 calories. Any takers? It is so important to know simple carbs and complex carbohydrates. I know you went over it. It is so important to stress it. Like I said, I didn't learn very much about this in medical school. I've had to learn this on the job. Simple carbs could be anything: fruits, honey, milk, any sugars added to cookies, candies, or soft drinks. The more complex a carbohydrate, the better it is for you. And I'm going to continue what you promised an hour ago and to say, can you promise to make one change after this class? How about stopping carbonated drinks or sweetened soft drinks for the next week or even for the next month. That's a big step to take in your preventing diabetes journey. The extra glucose that we eat in any carbohydrates that we're consuming, the extra sugar is converted into a type of starch called glycogen. I talked about glycogen storage earlier. It's stored in the muscles and around the liver, and when you need energy, it's converted to glucose. And if you eat so many carbohydrates that the body's glycogen stores are full, the excess carbohydrates are stored as fat instead. This goes back to the balance of calories in and calories out. If we're storing weight, if we're storing energy, we're eating too much. If we're gaining weight, and the weight is not just water, some people gain weight just because of certain medical conditions they may have, and it could be fluid weight. But if we're gaining weight, that is extra calories we are storing as energy. And these are calories that we're eating, we're overeating. And in this country, it's easy to do. This is you don't have to see this, you don't have to worry about it. This is a slide just to tell you what body mass index is. Body mass index is a measure of body fat based on your weight in relationship to your heart and applies to most adult men and women aged 20 and over. For somebody for a woman who's 5'5", who weighs 127 to 141 pounds, that is a normal weight. Anything above that is above normal body mass index. I just want to share with you what goes on in my head, or the doctor's brain, when we talk about diabetes treatment options. If somebody's diabetic and they come to us and we've already maximized and optimized lifestyle, we've optimized dietary changes, we've optimized exercise, what's the next step? Well, these are big charts. This is a chart on medications that are available for diabetes. We almost always start with a medication called metformin, and we try to maximize it to a level of about 2,000 milligrams a day. That is almost always our first medicine. That is made from French lilac. You can't get any more natural than that. It is a pill that we take. It helps us to decrease sugar levels, but it does not cause our sugar levels to drop. It doesn't drop them below normal. There are some contraindications to metformin, and we always discuss that during your visits. Then we add a second medication, and second medication could be a variety of medications. And then triple therapy, there's even more medications options here. And what if we need to go to insulin? We start with a basal insulin, we add on a rapid-acting insulin, then we have to count carbohydrates, and we have to tell you how much to use. It is complicated. It's something that we always discuss with people, but there's a lot of choices decisions that are going on in our brains when we're talking about medications and the medication option. I'm more than happy to discuss those with you in detail, but this is beyond the scope of our lecture today. A person with diabetes can do just about anything he or she wants to. Do you think that's true or false? I'd say that's great after we've optimized our treatment and you've got the knowledge you need. That is fantastic. Remember, life with diabetes is what you make it. You're the one in control. Cook a healthy meal, get some great feeling exercise, or take other healthy steps to keep your sugar well controlled. And we are grateful for me and my family for you all to be here. Thank you all for sharing the time with us.
I want to thank Christina and Dr. Kaloff for a wonderful lecture. Would you agree? If you have questions, can you hold up your cards and Katie will pick them up? So just kind of hold them up in the air.
Feel free to get up and walk around, like I said, and get some snacks. I'm going to stand.
Okay, the first question I have here is, how does sugar alcohols affect diabetes?
So sugar alcohols don't have calories, so they're fine, but sugar alcohols can irritate the gut for some people, so they draw water in and they can cause diarrhea and gas and bloating. They're fine, so you can use those, or you can use Splenda or stevia.
Another excellent question. How does poverty or living in a food desert affect diabetes?
That is a great question. Do you want to start it?
Sure. I think it has a huge impact because you don't have that access to nutritious foods. So if you do have access, you're looking at gas stations or just a limited supply, maybe fast food. So the choices that you have at hand aren't great. You have a lot of those foods that have, the added sugars, a lot of soda, not the best complex carbohydrates. So that makes it really difficult for a diabetic. But there are ways. So if you do have access to community resources like this, utilize them.
I agree 100%. There's a much greater risk of having diabetes if somebody's from a lower socioeconomic standpoint. I spend a lot of time talking to patients about the cost of food and nutrition sources, and I will tell you that even 99-cent store has a ton of vegetables now and a lot of frozen veggies and fruits that are easy to come by, and a bag of beans is like $1, and you can eat that bag of beans probably for a month. So I can't say that there's an excuse for not eating healthy foods if someone is not making enough money. And I will tell you, I also have handouts for someone to eat on less than $5 a day. Healthy diet, so we can't go wrong.
Eating healthy is often less expensive, actually. Okay, a little bit more about importance of glycemic index, glycemic load in food selection. This is a question.
I don't really go by glycemic index or glycemic load. I think it's more important to look at the total carbohydrate because all of that is going to turn into sugar in the body, and that makes it a lot more simple for you. You don't want to do all of that extra work either.
I tend to agree. It's a lot of extra thought that we don't always need to place when we're deciding which food we're going to have. You want a more nutritious food. Glycemic index and glycemic load basically tell you the more simple carbohydrates versus more complex carbohydrates. We usually tend to say eat more complex carbohydrates, eat your veggies. I wouldn't worry too much about the glycemic load, but some people do, and that's okay. There are lots of resources about it. It's just not something we often talk about in our offices.
Rice is starchy and seems to impact sugar, but it's also a whole grain complex carb. Recommendations for rice in a diabetic diet.
Great question. These are great questions.
They are, yeah. So you can have rice as a diabetic, like I said. So white rice versus brown rice, for example. You want to choose the brown rice whenever possible because you are going to get some of that fiber, and that's going to help regulate the blood sugar as well. So like I said, making half of your grains whole is very helpful. And then by testing your blood sugars, you can kind of see how it reacts in your body and the portion that you need to manipulate, but you totally can have any sort of starch.
I have found some people more sensitive to rice than others, and rice can spike sugars very much, and that could be very individual. For the most part, early onset diabetics can still consume rice. Remember the plate you saw earlier, that plate. What's most in that plate? Veggies. That is your starting point. That's what your plate should look like in the beginning. There's a small amount of healthy protein and a small amount of this rice or a similar carbohydrate. That you want to start with your veggies.
Okay, here's a controversial one. Okay. Is coconut oil good for health?
Okay, so like I said earlier, coconut oil is the exception. So coconut oil is actually a saturated fat, just like high-fat meats, butter, lard. It is a medium-chain triglyceride, so it digests a little bit more quickly. It goes straight into the bloodstream, but that doesn't make it a heart-healthy fat, just because it's digesting quicker. So I would use, if you like the flavor of coconut oil, it's fine to use every now and again, but just remember that it's not necessarily heart healthy, so I would rather you use something like olive oil or canola oil.
Yeah, this comes up for the last 3 years since we've been here. I know there's lots of advertising about it. Please heed these recommendations. I agree. I have a question here, if that's okay. The mystery of A1C is difficult to understand. Please explain with details how to interpret the charts. Well, it is hopefully as straightforward as we can get it. Under 6.5, to 5.7 is prediabetes, 6.5 and above is diabetes, and A1C less than 7 is what we recommend in someone with diabetes. If someone has diabetes diagnosed, there's a much lower risk of complications if there's a hemoglobin A1C over 3 months less than 7. We want to keep it as low as possible, but under 7 is a good place to start. If it's above 7, you need at least more medications. Definitely improve your lifestyle. You may or may not need additional medications and possibly even insulin. If somebody is higher, say 9 or 10, many times we'll talk about starting insulin, and it's of course very individualized, but insulin is crucial in helping bringing the sugars down. Can a patient reverse diabetes? I love that. If you have been diagnosed with prediabetes, there's a very strong chance you can stabilize it and even prevent it. Very strong chance. Early onset type 2 diabetes, this is a key, prevention. Early onset type 2 diabetes, you may still be able to stabilize it and even reverse it. Once we're further along, remember I said once you're diagnosed, about 50% of your islet cells in the pancreas are no longer working. If they're no longer working, they cannot come back. We don't have stem cells right now to replace those islet cells. So we may not be able to reverse it once it's further along or more years.
This is a question about eggs. Is it okay to have 2 or more eggs per day? And this person says that they're active, 60 to 120 minutes of biking a day and 20 to 30 miles, and then also new research on eggs.
Okay, so this is a great question because there is a lot of new research coming out about cholesterol and the impact on heart health, that it's not as much of an indicator as saturated fat is for heart health. I still think we need a little bit more research there, so the golden standard is 1 egg per day, but you can do your 2 or 3 eggs per day and then maybe have a couple days per week where you're doing something different, like low-fat Greek yogurt, or maybe some oatmeal with peanut butter in it. So if you like having those 3 eggs, I would switch it up like that.
I think this applies to the whole egg, white and yolk. The best part of the egg, really, the yolk has a lot of good nutrients, but the best part is really the white. The white is about 30 calories. It's minimal calories. It's a fantastic source of protein. Does protein raise your sugar? No. Protein is the greatest way to maintain your sugar and keep it stable. And we always say egg whites are actually, especially hard-boiled egg whites, are fantastic little snacks. And you can probably have more than 1 a day.
This is a question about olive oil. Is it good for diabetics? And which kind is the best kind of olive oil?
Yeah, so any plant-based oil is good for diabetics, so olive oil is fine. Just your regular extra virgin olive oil is just fine. Like I said, unsaturated fat is best, so you can play around with olive oil, canola oil, avocado oil is a new one, so any of those are fine.
I have to agree. But just using olive oil, I know we all talk about the 3 diets that are acceptable at American Diabetes Association, Mediterranean diet, DASH diet, and plant-based diet. The Mediterranean diet makes a big deal of using olive oil. But how much olive oil? What's a serving of olive oil? Did you talk about
5 grams, so 1 teaspoon.
Show us.
Yeah, the size of your thumb, like the tip of your thumb. Just the tip. of your thumb.
It's not a cup, it's not a pitcher,
Right.
that's all you get.
Exactly. So you don't want to overexceed your fat calories, even if they're coming from unsaturated fats either. So what I always recommend, also for weight management, like I said, fats are 9 calories per gram, whereas proteins and carbohydrates are 4. So you don't want to just be loading the olive oil on everything. So I'd recommend getting a little spray, an olive oil spray, and use that instead. So you're getting the healthy fats in, but you're keeping the portion where you want.
Sorry, I can keep talking. I apologize. If you need to fry something, believe it or not, you can fry something up in soup, in vegetable broth or chicken broth. You don't have to fry things in oil.
I think we answered this question already, but does excess protein convert to sugar, glycogens, in the liver and stored as fat?
Excess protein, excess anything will be stored. And remember, if we can't use our glycogen, we've stopped using, we've run out of glycogen stores, what do we use for food? What does our brain use for food? It uses our muscle and our fat. So yes, protein will eventually or can eventually be used as a source of food, as a source of nutrition and energy for the body. And many times that could be through ketogenesis. Sensitivity of skin decreases. Is this a symptom of diabetes? Well, we can say decreased sensitivity in your feet is neuropathy. Neuropathy is inflammation of the nerves. So it's unbelievable how often we do a foot exam in someone and we check their sensitivity and they can't feel it. And they have no idea that they have neuropathy. It's just mind-boggling, and it's incredibly scary. And how often we've diagnosed ulcers in feet, people have no idea they step on nails or they step on anything and have lesions on their feet. So neuropathy is a big, big problem in diabetes, which is why we always try to check the feet in diabetes. If the blood test indicates no diabetes, but my body does show symptoms, then what? We have seen pre-diabetes, so if there's the test that shows no diabetes, sometimes we can go a little bit further. We can do a glucose tolerance test, and that's drinking that horrible glucola or something like a Fanta, and we check your sugar at 1, 2, and sometimes 3 hours. It's something women have done to check for gestational diabetes. So we can check further. We can do a hemoglobin A1C. Remember, these are non-specific symptoms. Feeling tired, maybe sugar, maybe thyroid. It could be not getting enough sleep. It could be eating the wrong meal. It could be a variety of things. So what's the next step? See your doctor. Talk to them. Are there over-the-counter supplements to assist in metabolism? Ooh, you guys are good. Is there an over-the-counter supplement that improves my quality of life? Will any of these decrease the risk of cancer? Do any of these keep me alive a longer period of time? The answer is no. Unless you're deficient, there is no over-the-counter supplement that will improve anything. Deficiency, yes. Many times we'll recommend vitamin D. In someone who's on a very strict diet, we may recommend take a multivitamin. Why? Because it replaces a little bit of everything that we need. But for the most part, sadly, I'm sorry to tell you, all that money and that huge industry is making money off of you for no good reason. Oh, okay. Oh, I got another one for me. My hemoglobin level have been gradually going up. It's been going up from 5.4 to 5.9. So we said, what is a normal A1C? Under 5.7. So 5.4 would be in the normal range. 5.9 is now in the prediabetes range. It's something that we often see as over time, right? We said there may be a development or increased sugar level over time. The average sugar is 117 to 123 from recent 2 test results. Today, the sugar is 95, and my pre-diabetic. I can't diagnose you today, unfortunately. There's a possibility. Something that we would strongly recommend is speak to your doctor for more information so you can get very personalized knowledge and great understanding and maybe talk about next possible steps. You've learned a lot today, I hope. You'll have a lot of really good questions for your doctor. And someone has high cholesterol. So in prediabetes and high cholesterol, what do I say? You probably need to be on a statin. Let's talk about that. Let's prevent any possible complications of diabetes. But what's the first thing we talk about? Are you getting the right exercise? Are you eating healthy? Have you seen a diabetic educator and a dietitian?
That's all the questions that I have. Thank you all for coming tonight, and I believe that Dr. Kaloff will stay and Christina to answer any more questions that you have.